This month, Armenians worldwide will mark the 100th commemoration of the Armenian Genocide.
April of 1915 began the genocide in which 1.5 million Armenians died at the hands of Ottoman Turks. It's an atrocity that many nations, including the U.S., still don't formally recognize.
Thank you, Congressman Schiff, Congressman Dold, Congressman Valadeo and Pallone, our two Armenian-American members, Congresswoman Anna Eshoo, Jackie Spear, Congressman Sherman, Congresswoman Chu. Thank you all. For far too long, America has pursued, the Obama administration and those that have preceded it have pursued a flawed and ultimately failed approach to the Armenian Genocide issue. One that essentially outsources our policy on this issue to the Republic of Turkey. One that allows a foreign nation to impose a gag rule on how we can speak about a human rights abuse.
On April 24th, we will commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide. 100 years ago, the Ottoman Empire, in its dying throes, undertook a systematic effort to exterminate the Armenian people, killing over 1.5 million Armenian men, women, and children in a campaign of death and destruction. We stand together because in the face of the continued denial of the historic facts of the genocide by Turkey, we have a duty and an obligation to speak the truth. That's why I was proud to join with 50 of my colleagues last month to introduce the Armenian Genocide Truth and Justice Resolution, which would recognize the genocide and call on the administration to work towards a reconciliation between Turkey and Armenia based on the acceptance of the historic facts. As we approach April 24th, I'm also working with my colleagues to call on the President to recognize the Armenian Genocide. Our government must not continue to maintain a shameful silence about the killings, especially since American diplomats and journalists were so instrumental in alerting the outside world about what was happening to the Armenian people at the time.
My presentation today is titled Genocide Recognition or Quest for Justice. As we approach the centennial of the Armenian Genocide in a few days, Armenians at long last are demanding justice rather than the simple acknowledgement of the mass murder of 1.5 million of their ancestors by the Ottoman Turkish government. Similar barbaric crimes are being committed by ISIS in our own time and in the same regions of Iraq and Syria where survivors of the Armenian Genocide had settled a century ago. Let us quickly review the historic developments since 1915 of this critical Armenian issue. In the immediate aftermath of the genocide, most of the survivors, scattered throughout the Middle East, had no food, no shelter, and barely the clothes on their back. The destitute Armenian refugees, abandoned to their tragic fate, were forced to settle in permanent exile. In those early years, their first priority was survival, fending off starvation and disease. Gradually, they rebuilt their lives in new homes, churches, and schools. Engaging in lobbying activities or making political demands were the last thing on their mind. Every April 24, Armenians commemorate the genocide by gathering in church halls and offering prayers for the souls of the 1.5 million victims. Successive generations tried to break the wall of silence surrounding the greatest tragedy that befell the Armenian nation. Tens of thousands of Armenians in communities throughout the world held protest marches, wrote letters to government officials, and petitioned international organizations. The Turkish government, along with the rest of the world, initially turned a deaf ear to Armenian demands for recognition of the long-forgotten genocide. But as media outlets, world leaders, parliaments of various countries, and international organizations began acknowledging the genocide, Turkish authorities, astonished that the crimes perpetrated by their forefathers were making headlines after so many decades, began to pump massive resources into their campaign of denial, funded foreign scholars to distort the historical facts, hired powerful lobbying firms, and applied political economic pressure on countries acknowledging the genocide. Since 1965, over 20 countries, including Canada, France, Italy, Switzerland, Belgium, Greece, Russia, Poland, Sweden, Argentina, and Uruguay have recognized the Armenian genocide. Even though it is commonly assumed that the United States has not acknowledged the Armenian Genocide, the fact is that all three branches of the American government have repeatedly recognized it. The first time that the executive branch made a reference to the Armenian genocide was all the way back in 1951 in a document filed by the US government with the International Court of Justice, known as the World Court. The second reference to the Armenian Genocide by the executive branch was made by President Ronald Reagan when he issued Presidential Proclamation 4838 on April 22nd, 1981. The legislative branch, the US Congress, adopted two resolutions in 1975 and 1984 confirming the historical facts of the Armenian Genocide. Most people are unaware that the judiciary, the third branch of our government, has also issued 3 federal court rulings in recent years concerning the Armenian Genocide. Thus, all 3 branches of the US government have gone on record recognizing the Armenian Genocide. In fact, in many respects, the United States has compiled a more extensive record of acknowledging the Armenian Genocide than many other countries that have merely adopted parliamentary resolutions on this issue. International organizations, including the United Nations, have also recognized the Armenian Genocide. The UN Subcommission on Prevention of Discrimination and Protection of Minorities adopted their report in 1985, acknowledging that the Armenian Genocide met all 5 UN criteria for genocide. 2 years later, in 1987, the European Parliament adopted their resolution, again recognizing the Armenian Genocide. In addition, hundreds of Holocaust and genocide scholars have issued joint statements confirming the facts of the genocide. After so many acknowledgments, the Armenian Genocide has become a universally recognized historical fact. Regrettably, despite such widespread recognition, there are a few remaining major countries that have yet to face the facts. Those siding with the denialist regime in Turkey are not doing so due to lack of documents or conviction, but because of political expediency with the intent of appeasing the denier. One would hope that these governments would join most of the enlightened world in acknowledging the historical facts as they are and not as the Turkish government wishes them to be. Armenians no longer need to convince the world that they were the victims of genocide. Nevertheless, the simple acknowledgement of what took place and a mere apology would not heal the deep wounds and undo the consequences of the genocide. Armenians are still waiting for justice to be done, seeking restitution and return of their confiscated lands and properties. In recent years, American lawyers have successfully filed lawsuits in US federal courts, securing millions of dollars from New York Life and French AXA insurance companies for unpaid claims of policyholders who perished during the genocide. In 1915, a centrally planned attempt was made to uproot from its ancestral homeland and decimate an entire nation, depriving the survivors of their cultural heritage, as well as their homes, lands, houses of worship, and personal properties. A gross injustice was perpetrated against the Armenian people, entitling them, as in the case of the Jewish Holocaust, to just compensation for their enormous losses. As an initial step, the Republic of Turkey should place under the jurisdiction of the Armenian Patriarchate of Istanbul all the churches and religious monuments which were expropriated and converted to mosques and warehouses or outright destroyed. In considering legal recourse, one should keep in mind that the Armenian Genocide did neither start nor end in 1915. Large-scale genocidal acts were committed, starting with Sultan Abdul Hamid's massacre of 300,000 Armenians from 1894 to 1896, the killings by Young Turk regime of 30,000 Armenians in Adana in 1909, and finally the genocide of 1.5 million Armenians from 1915 to 1923. In subsequent decades, tens of thousands of Armenians were forcefully Turkified or deported by the Republic of Turkey. Most of the early leaders of the Republic were high-ranking Ottoman officials who played a major role in organizing the Armenian Genocide. This unbroken succession in leadership assured the continuity of the anti-Armenian campaign of race extermination. Today's Republic of Turkey, as the successor of the Ottoman Empire, has also its share of the guilt. In the 1920s and 30s, thousands of Armenian genocide survivors were forced out of their homes in Cilicia and Western Armenia and deported to other parts of Turkey or neighboring countries. In the 1940s, these racist policies were followed by what's called in Turkish varlık vergisi, the imposition of an exorbitant wealth tax on Armenians, Greeks, and Jews, bankrupting the remnants of these communities. And during the 1955 Istanbul pogroms, many Greeks as well as Armenians and Jews were killed and injured and their properties destroyed. This continuum of massacres, genocide, and deportations highlights the existence of a long-term strategy implemented by successive Turkish regimes from the 1890s to more recent times to solve the Armenian question with finality. Consequently, the Republic of Turkey is legally liable for its own crimes against Armenians, as well as those committed by the previous regime. The Turkish Republic inherited the assets of the Ottoman Empire, therefore it also inherited its liabilities. Finally, since Armenians often refer to their three sequential demands from Turkey: recognition of the genocide, reparations for their losses, and return of their lands, Turkish denialists have naturally concluded that once they recognize the genocide, Armenians will then pursue their two other demands. This is the main reason why Turkish leaders adamantly refuse to acknowledge the Armenian genocide, fearing that its acceptance would lead to demands for restitution. They believe that by denying the first demand, recognition, they would be blocking the next two. The fact is that commemorative resolutions adopted by legislative bodies of various countries and acknowledgement by world leaders have no force of law, therefore no legal consequence. The Turkish government must realize that recognition of the Armenian genocide, or the lack thereof, will neither enable nor deter its consideration by international legal institutions. Once Turkish officials understand that recognition by itself cannot and would not automatically lead to other demands, they may no longer persist in their obsessive denials. Without waiting for any further recognition, 100 years of waiting is long enough. Armenians must pursue their historic rights through legal channels, such as the International Court of Justice, where only states can bring a claim, also the European Court of Human Rights, as well as domestic courts. For Armenians, seeking justice means restitution and recovery of all losses from the genocide era, including communal properties such as churches, monuments, cemeteries, and schools, confiscated and looted personal assets, and the occupied territories of historic Armenia. The centennial is an excellent opportunity not just to commemorate the genocide, but to demand long overdue justice for the Armenian nation. Thank you.
Before moving on to taking question and answers from our audience members, I'm sure everybody has a number of questions that they would like to ask. I'd like to do one more pass with us, and I really want to talk about the, as the old saying goes, the elephant in the room. I want to ask the magic question. Why does the United States not recognize the genocide or utter that word? The real reasons behind it.
Well, I hope you heard my speech.
Right.
I just spent 10 minutes explaining that the U.S. not only is recognized, but repeatedly recognized. We just haven't got the news. So let me explain. This is very interesting. There's this widespread ignorance in the Armenian community, and because we are ignorant, we infect the non-Armenian community to think like us. We tell them it's not recognized. So the non-Armenians believe us, because we ourselves are ignorant about our own issues. What we're confusing, in fact, is not recognition. What's confusing is there is recognition. There's no question about recognition. All the way back in 1950, we're talking about the word genocide itself. If you go into before the word genocide, you can go all the way to 1915, massacres, mass killings, Yeah, crime against humanity, there's everything. But I'm talking, strictly, let's use the word genocide. It was used in 1951 by the US government in a document submitted to the World Court. So already in 1951, case closed, genocide recognized by the United States. If we did nothing else since 51, our issue of recognition was already solved 60 years ago. But we keep saying we want recognition, it's unrecognized. What we really should say, but we don't distinguish, is that we have a President of the United States right now, President Obama, who despite his repeated promises, repeated condemnation of previous presidents or previous Secretary of State, he just refuses to use the word genocide. That's different from not recognizing it. Not recognize is different from not reaffirming it or not using the term genocide. And in fact, he takes the chicken way out of it by saying, I have not changed my mind. In his annual statements, if you go back every year on April 24th, he says, I have not changed my mind. But does not say what was his mind. You have to go back and find out what he said before, put the two together. It's just silly word games, shameful, but let's not say that it's not recognized. Because not only it's not true, let me add something even more serious. When we say it's not recognized, we're really doing damage to our cause. We're raising a question in the people's mind, in the public at large, that there's something wrong with the genocide, that's why it's not recognized. In fact, what we're saying is, it is recognized, and anybody who refuses to use the word genocide, shame on them. So we should shame them, and not go to politicians and ask them to pass one more resolution. We have plenty of resolutions that were adopted, as I said in my speech. 1975, the whole House adopted unanimously. There was not one vote against it. 75 votes, if you go back, unanimous vote in the House of Representatives to adopt a resolution saying Armenian genocide, 1.5 million killed, April 24th to be the day of the commemoration of the Armenian genocide. 75. Then we go back to 1984 again. Again, the House passes a second resolution. Well, how many resolutions are going to pass before we convince ourselves and others that it was recognized? We should move on.
And I'm here to play the devil's advocate. That's about it. Georg, your thoughts on the subject?
I absolutely agree. I've been saying it for years. I mean, we have to say reaffirm, not recognize. I think exactly. Sometimes we don't think too much that terms are important, and we just use recognize. But it's actually reaffirm because it has been recognized, and by
because
all
I see all over Facebook and Instagram, especially the youth and the activists who might not necessarily be involved every day with the issue, but they every now and then tend to make posts on Facebook and on Instagram and on social media. How should they approach it? Because they actually are making a bunch of posts and then flooding the internet with evidence and statements and hashtags about the Armenian genocide.
Well, like I said, first of all, just educate about the term, which is very important. Educate about these facts that Mrs. Asunyan rightly pointed out, that there have been several important, crucial resolutions, saying, condemning Turkey for its genocide of the Armenian people. And in fact, even the 1951 actually a resolution submitted to the ICJ, International Court of Justice in The Hague, was actually worked upon by Dr. Raphael Lemkin. So Raphael Lemkin was also the one who insisted that Armenian genocide is a textbook example, and this is what was submitted to the United Nations and submitted by the US government to the ICJ in The Hague, citing the Armenian genocide specifically, using those words, the Armenian genocide as a clear example of what constitutes a genocide. So,
agreed. We'd like to open up the floor to any questions anybody would like to ask any one of the panel members. Yes, sir, all the way in the back.
Yes. I have a question, which is, tonight we established that the genocide has been recognized by the United States. If that's the case, then why over the last 20, 30 years we've had lobbying groups and we've been supporting politicians for genocide recognition? Isn't that redundancy and kind of a waste of our time and resources? Thank you. Anybody from the panel can answer that question.
That's another for the activists. I'm the historian. Because I can be very crucial too in this sense.
You want me to answer it? Okay.
Please.
Well, let's be honest and fair. And if we're wrong, we're wrong. If we're right, we're wrong. Here's the picture. For a long time, there was a need for all of us to struggle to get the genocide recognized. There was a time and a place for that. Because a long time ago, if you said Armenian, they didn't know what Armenian was. If you said genocide, they never heard of the word. And there are still some people like that. But we've come a long way from 50 years ago, 70 years ago. A lot of the people in the world, thank God, there's internet, there's TV, there's all this Armenian activism worldwide. Most people who care about the world, unless they're hidden in some village in the middle of China, they're aware now. Even in Turkey, millions of Turks now, the public at large I'm talking about, not the leaders. Leaders were aware all along. But the people in the hinterlands, in Anatolia, in villages, even they now have heard on their own TV sets, in Turkish, on the internet, that there was genocide. So we can congratulate ourselves for the fact that we've all done a great job. Our people, our organizations, political parties, the ANCs, and now in recent years the Armenian government with its embassies, no matter how much we criticize each other, let's be honest, we've done a relatively good job in spreading the word that there was a genocide. We publish books, there's scholars, there's movies, can more be done? Yes. Is it necessary to do more? I don't think so. I think we made our case. In court, when you present your case, you've done a good job, that's it. You don't keep on proving your case over and over until you stumble, make a mistake, and the whole thing crumbles. So we've made our case. The world knows it. As I said in my remarks, there are a few countries, major countries, and one of them is Israel, the other one is England. They don't want to say genocide. Is it because they don't know it was genocide? No. Is it because they need more evidence? No. It's just because of their relations with Turkey, economic relations, political relations. In fact, Jeffrey Robertson, the famous international lawyer, just published a book. In the book, he made a freedom of information request from the British government. There's a similar law that we have in this country. They have it also in England. And he got all the internal documents of recent years, not 100 years ago, just last few years ago, to see what the British leaders were saying to each other in their private meetings about the Armenian genocide. And it turns out, and he got some, a lot of them they scratched, crossed over, so that you can't read what they said because they're too embarrassed. It's scandalous if the world finds out what they were saying. But one of the documents, surprisingly, they forgot to scratch over. It says, well, our position is shameful, meaning the British government's position, but because we have economic and political dealing with Turkey, we have to take this shameful position of denying the genocide, saying it's not really genocide. So at this point, so there was a time where we needed to do that. Now, in recent years, do we want to continue doing this? Absolutely not. It's a complete waste of resources, manpower. We can be spending those funds, those energies that we have in a lot of other ways. Everything from strengthening Armenia economically, politically, militarily, our own communities, filing lawsuits in international courts, getting a team of top-notch international lawyers, which cost a lot of money. Set up a fund, hire them, do a lot of research. Lawyers are not going to get up just because we know it was genocide. You don't just go to court, international court, and say it was genocide or European court. You need to have documents. You need to have research, and not just emotional statements. All the time. It takes a lot of time. It takes years. We haven't done this.
So we have to start that.
We have to start at some point. Recently there's some steps being taken in that direction. So you need to organize this. You need to put money into it, get the experts, put all the documents in front of them, and then decide which court you present which of the issues. You don't just blindly go to any court and raise the genocide issue, because not all courts deal with past issues. There are questions about the Genocide Convention, because it was in 1948. and they may not consider any issue before the 48 issues of the World Court, may not even want to deal with the issue. And then if you don't do proper research, go to the experts, and you just blindly present an issue, and even on the technicality, the court says they reject it on the technicality, not because they rule against it. The Turks will take that, scream about it worldwide from rooftops, saying that, aha, the World Court rejected the Armenian claims. So this is a very serious thing. When it comes to genocide recognition, we all get up and protest or do campaigns. We're activists. But when it comes to international law, I don't know if there's anybody here in this hall who's an international expert. I'm not. So you need to be an international legal expert. There are only few people who qualify, very few among Armenians and even few non-Armenians. So we need to really get these people in a room, fund them, give them time, put all the documents in front of them, and then come to the bottom line. That's what would scare Turks more than anything else. All these resolutions, protests, lectures, movies, they have a bigger microphone than we do. They have a bigger loudspeaker than we do. It's a major country. When they say something, when Erdogan makes an announcement, the whole world hears it, whether they like it or not. If when we say it, or even the president of Armenia says something, only our Armenian papers carry it, we hear it. So there's a big difference between their ability to reach out to the world and us. But if you win a court case, and there's actual demand, a lot of people think that even if the court would decide something, that Turkey will not comply with it. That's another thing that's a falsehood. The European Court of Human Rights, where Turkey is a member of European Council, not the European Union, but Turkey has been a member of European Council of Europe since 1950s. There's something called the European Court of Human Rights that is enforceable to all member states of the Council of Europe, and Turkey is a member. Since 1950 till today, Turkey has lost thousands of lawsuits in the European Court. And believe it or not, they have paid every single fine European Court has placed on Turkey, to the last penny. Why? If they ignore, don't pay a single dollar from the verdict of the European Court, they'll be thrown out of the Council of Europe, and they will never ever join the European Union. So we have really important angles. All we have to do is approach it logically, get the help of experts, and pursue it in an intelligent way. And I think Centennial is, enough recognition, and let's move on to really working on our demands.
Mr. Mahmoud, you had a question?